Hi, everybody. I'm Matt from Vice. First of all, I want to thank CXI and the Bielefeld School of Design for having us. I work at Vice. It started as a magazine 2 decades ago. I've been with the company for over a decade, and since then, it's grown into a big international media company that focuses on content that most young people watch, hopefully.
And I'm Greg Hahn, and I wanted to thank Robert for inviting us out. I'm the founder and owner of Gretel, a creative branding studio in New York City.
And I'm Ryan Moore, creative director at Gretel, and I was the lead on this job, VICELAND, which Matt is going to give us a little bit of background on now. And just so you guys know, Matt's side of the story is going to be in black with the Vice logo on the top left, and our side is going to be in white with the Gretel logo on the top left.
So a little backstory on the project and how the network got started. In the fall of 2015, an American television network called A&E signed a deal that would have us take over one of their failing networks called H2, which is short for History 2. So the guy you see in that picture is Shane Smith. He's the company's co-founder. Shane entrusted the TV network to Eddie Moretti, guy on the bottom, and Spike Jonze up top. You might have heard of Spike before. He's a director, has done many films, skate videos. I don't know if you've heard of Her, Being John Malkovich, Where the Wild Things Are. They are, in my opinion, some of the most brilliant people you'll meet, but not designers. That's where I come in. I am Vice's head of design and also translator.
You can tell from the photo that Matt is the designer. Yeah.
So from there, we started making the type of shows we wanted to see. By the spring of that same year, we had the content and programming, but not a clue what we wanted the network to actually be. There were a few key cornerstones: authentic and human storytelling, an unusual point of view. We even made posters before we had episodes finished. So just to give you a snapshot, I won't take you through all of these, but on the top left is a show called Black Market, hosted by Michael K. Williams. I don't know if you guys are fans of The Wire, but he basically goes around the world and focuses on underground economies. And it's less about being in these dangerous situations, but more about how it's people's only option to survive. So it's much more of a human story. Another example is Weedakit. You can kind of guess from the title what that's about. But it's less about weed porn and more about the social, cultural, and political implications of the growing marijuana industry and legalization. And then there's more humorous fare, like Fuck, That's Delicious, which is a show hosted by Action Bronson. He's a rapper and chef. So a little while later, I get an email from Eddie, my boss. This comes from a high-level TV executive making a suggestion for how the network should look. It became abundantly clear we needed an identity for the channel. The core team at Vice had worked in TV, but never launched and packaged an entire network, which was both liberating and kind of terrifying. We needed a collaborator that would get us. So from there, we reached out to 4 agencies, one being Gretel.
Yeah, what you see here, this email, it's sort of scary, and if you've ever been in this position, you'll know what I'm talking about. This is a case where, because there was some time that had gone by, an executive, from the executive side, came in and started making suggestions about what the brand should be. And as a creative, you can see, Eddie started getting a little anxious about that and wanted to get the process going. And it's kind of what happens in a vacuum if the creative isn't leading. There's a tendency to try and fill that vacuum with ideas.
Yeah, such as multicolored logos. You can see branding with 2 exclamation points at the end.
So on our end, that's when Vice got in touch with us, and we were, of course, very excited about it. Vice is a huge brand globally, carries a lot of weight for us when we're deciding on projects. That's one of the things that we consider, which is what is the value of the brand that we're working with. But unfortunately, we had a lot of work going on at the time. Ryan was about to have a baby at the time.
Yeah.
And my personal feeling was that we shouldn't take it on because I just didn't think we had the time to do it. But I asked Ryan about it, and baby or not, he was determined to take on the project, so we did. But because of the other work, we had a 4-week process to develop the pitch, and we immediately lost a week of that time, finishing up other jobs. So that added some pressure for us.
So the brief. I was getting married at the time, so in my absence, the team briefed 4 studios that same spring. But honestly, it wasn't really a brief. Describing and codifying Vice as a company for anyone is hard. We didn't have the traditional positioning or strategy documents, just a lot of business-related stats and a really cool reel. And of course, there were the shows themselves. For some, it would have been a frustrating briefing exercise, but part of it was to see if any of these agencies would get us.
Yeah, and as Matt said, there was really just the content. That was kind of all they had developed. And they had done a reel that sort of showcased all these different types of shows that they were developing. And that was it. And that really, was exciting. It was emotional. It was very real, almost dangerous in some ways. But that was unique because there was nothing else in the brief that said, here's who we are as a company, here's what we stand for, here's our brand values, here's what our personality is. Nothing was mentioned. It was just sort of about growth and development of the company.
Yeah, and one other aspect of the briefing process that was really unique for us is we were in the room with every other company who was going to be pitching. So you're sitting there next to your competition, listening carefully, and then sort of weighing, should I ask a question? Is that going to give something away if I ask the wrong question? And that was totally new for us.
Yeah. But one thing was definitely clear out of the whole thing, which is you either get us or you don't. And for us, a lot of times when we go into a presentation to a client, we're sort of reiterating what they have told us about themselves and clarifying what we think that they're about. And this was a case where we didn't do any of that. It just seemed pointless to us. We got it. They knew that we got it, and that was enough. And it was liberating for us.
So I'm going to walk you through the original pitch, which is different from the final output, and you'll see that as we sort of step through it. The original meeting was about an hour long, and we had a book that was over 100 pages and 60-some slides. So I'm going to give you this sort of quick overview version here today. For Vice, we took from them this idea that their content really is the brand. I mean, it's sort of the centerpiece of everything. They're producing all of it in-house, so we didn't have to do the job that we sometimes have to do of threading it all together or filtering it or finding the connective tissue there. Our job was really to step back and sort of let the content shine through and push forward. We started, as Greg mentioned, with behavioral analogs. So how does Vice behave out in the world, and how can that translate to this new network of ViceLand? So for us, thinking broadly, Vice is a lens. They're always framing not the obvious story, but the other story, or the other story. It's a unique take, even if it's a familiar subject. And Vice never stops, because culture never stops. Somewhere in the world right now, something beautiful, interesting, shocking, sublime is happening, and Vice is right there, documenting it and sending it back. Vice, of course, has a strong point of view. Matt was sort of there when they were just a magazine, and now they're sort of a digital powerhouse. But they still have a journalistic sensibility, and of course, they still publish. And Vice is a feed. They are constantly processing and streaming out a cross-section of culture: sports, music, news, politics, sex, food. If you look at Vice.com right now, you'll see all these topics kind of mashed together, and Vice is parsing it and relaying it all. And they're a guide. So Vice at large is navigating culture, and part of this job for us was to build a navigation system for this new brand to direct people through the channel, the offering, and the talent. So we kind of gave ourselves these analogs as a sort of internal brief. We had a list of objectives: keeping the content forward, constantly seeking the idea of an editorial point of view, this thought of a timeline and a wayfinding system. We had all these great ideas, but we didn't yet have any design. So the question is, how can we bake all this into the brand?
Yeah, and that was sort of a tense moment for us. I mean, other people have talked about this today, which is there's a lot of development, there's a lot of thinking that you do before you actually get down and create the design. This was a case where we had all the thinking, we really felt good about the way that we were framing the brand, we knew how it would move and behave, but we didn't have a single thing designed. And now another week has gone by, we have 2 weeks left, and we're starting to feel the pressure. And if you guys have ever had that feeling, it can be stressful to feel like you don't have a piece of design.
Yeah.
And usually it just takes somebody working through it until it gets cracked. In this case for us, it was an art director at Gretel named Dylan Mulvaney. Ryan and I went home one night, Dylan stayed late, he stayed later, and we came back the next day, and he had just a couple of frames that basically were it. They captured all of the different things that we had talked about, and he somehow made it into, what felt like something that could grow into a system. And, so the moral there is if you're ever totally stuck, you should just call Dylan Mulvaney. He's really talented, he'll take care of you.
He'll email you the next day with the answer. So what is the system? Our answer, the design that we came up with, the system we came up with, we call the line, and you've been seeing it here in the deck. It's a visual metaphor for a brand that never stops seeking. It's a feed, it's a timeline, it can frame content or contain it within itself, and it never stops. That was part of our thinking, that it should never come to rest. It's always kind of searching. And it's modular, so it can contain headlines, subheads, body copy, context, tweets. It sort of embodies this journalistic sensibility within almost like a user experience. So how do we bring it to life? When we present brands, we often want to talk about behaviors and how the system sort of expresses the core value of the brand through motion. So we felt like it should always be moving, it should never stop. We should be able to sort of take the wide view and get a closer look so we can see the network as a whole, or individual people, shows, pieces of content. We should be able to search and find within the stream, within the line. And it's responsive. So modules can expand or contract or trigger other modules to behave in a different way. So that's kind of the overall framework. That's the living wireframe that was the line, the system. And we had to put it to work to do all of the things that a network brand has to do. Meaning, on air, for example, sort of navigating programming and telling you what's on and when, bridging you between clips and footage and messaging, even tiny functional pieces like lower thirds and bugs that sort of take you out into commercial. We had to make that part of our brand system and make sure that our line could scale up and scale down. So even these little pieces were critical components, because often they're the thing that you see on air quite often. And the design system itself is transparent. It pulls the content forward by being itself this sort of light touch on top of it. It doesn't sort of stamp on it or overpower it in any way. So another part of Matt's brief to us was looking for idents for the network, but they didn't want finished pieces. What they wanted was a brief so they could go out to artists and designers and fashion designers and filmmakers and whoever and create these pieces that reflected the brand on their air. So it was sort of for us in the brief to come up with our own brief for these people to express the brand. So in that first email from the executive that Matt showed at the beginning of the presentation, you saw a suggestion of doing container branding like MTV, like old MTV, where you would fill the logo. Maybe it's filled with rainbow colors, maybe it's filled with photography. We chose not to do that. We went another direction and looked at our system, looked at our thinking, and thought, how can we create a very simple brief for people? And our thought was take the motion of the line, this lateral move, camera move, and that's it. You move the camera left to right, and you frame the critical moment that sort of speaks to the network's sensibility. So the format, which is based on the line, is locked, but the content, the subject matter, the style is wide open. And it can be photography, it could be illustrative, you could have live action. These at the bottom here, these are the 18 state-approved hairstyles for women in North Korea.
I think I'm a 16.
16.
Yeah, you're like a 12.
Yeah, it's sort of equally sad and interesting. And we also proposed this idea of locator IDs. So when the Vice film crews are out in the world, they can tip the camera sideways from what they're shooting and just pick up and let us know where they are, latitude and longitude, time and temperature, really to reinforce this idea that they're out there at all hours of the day looking, and then these would be aired simultaneously on the channel. And of course, like any media brand, today it has to translate and traverse different platforms, different executions, print, out of home, digital, serial posters, t-shirts. So what does that all add up to? How does it feel? This is how it looks. This is sort of the logic behind it, but what's the takeaway in the end? This was our montage for the pitch.
That's like a next level Sherry Garcia.
By chance, I seen her in the lobby of the Ritz with a man, the one that swings the hockey stick. I was wearing all white and my hair was looking precious. Shit, I might cop a chest and a dresser. I heard your bitch still.
Lungs like smokestacks, young black terror attack. Hair on their neck raised, scaring them back. Keeping my Kerouac first rate, they in the first grade. Begging like babe.
The new legitimate business of marijuana is at a crossroads.
Are you a little afraid to maybe smoke the whole thing?
It's a little intimidating.
I'm very conscious right now of the animals. Like, very in tune with the animals.
Just a little caveat there. In a pitch, we're pulling from whatever we can find. So you're going to see material that Vice produced, stuff that we sort of scraped from the web, some stuff that we sort of shot ourselves. But it's a total mashup.
Yeah, and that was the basic pitch. And for us, this was one of the more clear-headed, cleverest, presentations that we had done to date. It was the mix of smart and emotional, and intellect and intuition. That's kind of what we're always going for.
Out of all the companies who pitched us, they had impressive work. Some got our vibe, but there was nothing behind the mechanics to prove it could work as a system. And others presented some of the slickest packaging we've seen, but it felt like another MTV, which we aren't nor ever wanted to be. Out of all of them, we thought Gretel had it.
Yeah, and sometimes when you pitch, it can be sort of dead air in the room. A lot of clients like to
sort of that experience before, but it's harrowing, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think some clients just like to play it close to the vest and not give anything away. And this was not one of those. The feeling in the room was really good. There was handshakes, pats on the back. Hopefully, I'm remembering it right. But that was at least our experience of it. Really positive feeling when we left. So we go back to the shop. We have other projects. We're working on those things. And wait a week. Week goes by. We haven't heard anything. Another week goes by, we haven't heard anything. And one of the other creatives that we pitched to, other than Matt, calls us and says he's leaving the company.
Not good.
That was sort of disheartening and deflating. We kind of felt like, okay, this may not be happening. Another week goes by, and keep in mind, this is, the whole thing is a pretty accelerated timeline.
Yeah, we built the pitch in those remaining 2 weeks, so to wait 3 weeks was not great.
For context, those 3 weeks, we're also trying to wrangle Eddie and Spike, my bosses, but this also happened. So we showed it to Spike, and he didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. He thought it was too cold, slick, inhuman, impersonal.
Yeah, I take offense to that, but even from Spike Jones.
For context, Spike, as a famous director, has been pitched to his entire life by agency types that are more concerned about what they think the industry and market wants.
Yeah, I sort of took offense to the agency types thing also.
Matt had a different word than types, but he toned it down for the presentation.
There were a few more curse words before this presentation. But yeah, needless to say, I mean, everyone's sales were deflated all around. But I still had hope we could salvage it and make this network work. It was decided we'd rebrief them with Spike's feedback and see if they'd be willing to repitch. So we give Gretel a call.
Yeah, and the call, obviously this isn't the call that we wanted to hear. The call we want to hear is that they love it and we're getting started. But instead it was that Spike and Eddie didn't feel like it was right for VICELAND. We thought it was the best thing we had ever done. So sort of dead air on the other end of the phone.
But we really liked Gretel. Well, I liked Gretel and their presentation, and we wanted to try to keep them in the mix. So we offered to have them repitch.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not a big fan of repitching. We spend money and time on a pitch. We'd already done it. The last thing I want to do is go through that whole thing again. So we sort of offered to maybe work on it, temporarily and pick it up again, but it was a little ambiguous at this point.
Yeah, and from there it was a matter of figuring out how to get Spike on board. We've dealt with so many companies full of shit, and part of this meeting was to prove Gretel aren't typical agency types. They could work with us and also be collaborators. And sometimes just meeting face-to-face and talking with a client on a human level can prove more effective than any amount of pitching. So then a week passes, my mom is in town, and I get a message from my boss, Eddie, looking for the work Gretel presented. So it turns out Eddie had just come from a meeting with Shane Smith, the head of Vice, and Shane says he's looking for an identity for Vice's news show on HBO. Shane is looking for something that feels like a UX, a user experience, a platform or app. And Eddie says, I just saw that. So that reel ended up becoming the impetus for the packaging and design of Vice on HBO, our documentary news series. So Gretel had won another job from the strength of their pitch. Yep. But back to VICELAND and the meeting. So from there, we had the meeting with Spike and Eddie to just talk. No pitching. This is quite literally a vibe check.
Yeah, and this was a little ambiguous and mysterious for us. Like I said, we didn't know if we had the job, if we didn't have the job. We were just going in for sort of a meet and greet, and we were going to see what happened.
Yeah, we didn't know who was even going to be there. It was very hush-hush, yeah. So we came in, we talked about the pitch a little bit, and we showed Spike and Eddie and the rest of the team some of our other work, just to sort of get them on board. We've done other network brands before, and we take pride in the fact that they don't feel like, I think, television network brands. So we showed 2 jobs in particular that I'm really proud of, and Spike is kind of nodding politely the whole time, and at the end of it, he's like, great, great. So the opposite of that.
Yeah, honestly, that was sort of fantastic for us to hear. This is kind of like a dream for us as a client that doesn't want to go with the sort of known vernacular for a specific category. So it was, liberating for us, and I think that mentality played out throughout the process and was what made it so successful.
Yeah, agreed, and that's part of why I love working for Vice. I mean, despite being a big international organization, what has made us so successful is our sort of punk, do-it-yourself, DIY roots. We have such a high bullshit radar that it's important for us not to bullshit people and be the same old TV network. It really gives a feeling of purpose when you're at Vice doing that.
Matt's going to be swearing a lot throughout the rest of the presentation. That's you.
Yeah, so somewhere during that meeting, we essentially passed the test. I think at the end of the meeting, I actually had to say, do we have this job or not? Just to be clear. But at that point, the job went from, for us, what's typically a pitch situation to a direct award situation. We still had to work up this new direction, but now we were going to be in a collaborative process with the client, which we really enjoy. Obviously, very different modes of operating, but direct award means we get to have much more conversation throughout the process, whereas a pitch, we tend to sort of go away and come back with a solution. And over the course of a couple of meetings, we had some really great feedback from the team, which was, step back even further. We thought we had pitched something that was pretty transparent and really put the content forward, but we didn't go far enough. And they were basically saying, look, let the emotion of the content come through. And then the other was to unpolish it, keep it less branded. And again, great input, exciting for us. It sparked ideas for everybody. And it was really the type of notes that we as an agency want to hear from a client. It was, broad gut feeling types of notes, as opposed to trying to step in and give solutions. They were really giving us a reaction that we could then react to and provide solutions for.
So back to the studio and digging in once again. We had to kind of recalibrate and figure out how to interpret these notes, and we started by pulling references and looking for buckets, sort of patterns that started to emerge, and everybody, all the designers, myself included, had a different take on how to interpret these notes. But as we started combing through and developing and sketching, 3 distinctive directions or approaches started to kind of come out of the pool. And in our next review with the team, we went to Vice, and instead of bringing a deck or bringing any kind of slick presentation, we brought big posters. These are like 5-foot posters that we hung up on the wall that were just a smattering of frames sketched in each direction, and just started talking them through. So this first one, it really came out of a sort of functional visual language, especially relevant for television, and that's subtitling. So it was anchored around a typeface built for film subtitles, which sort of felt universal and global, and had a nice kind of raw, sort of underworked feeling that felt like it was getting at this note of Spike's about empathy and letting the content really shine through.
Yeah, and the idea of the subtitle font just seemed really nice because it's actually used for translating across cultures. And this is a cultural network that was going to be global. It just felt like a nice fit, but overall it just didn't stick because it didn't feel like it had legs as a whole identity.
Yeah, and it was great to look at on a large TV screen, but we had concerns about it translating on smaller screens and mobile, because obviously we're not just television, we wanted to extend beyond.
So pretty quickly we moved on from there to number 2. This approach is really built around the idea of Matt just spoke about do-it-yourself, kind of almost amateur design aesthetic, the kind of thing you would make at the local copy shop if you needed to rent your apartment or you needed to hire a van to sort of move your stuff from place to place. It borrows from that language. In the US, the chain of copy shops that's ubiquitous is actually called Kinko's. I don't know if you have Kinko's. I haven't seen Kinko's here in Germany. But it's that idea that you could go there and tell the guy behind the counter what you needed, and he would design it in Microsoft Word or something. So I think we at Gretel pride ourselves in the idea of building systems, and systems that can flex, and systems that don't feel like systems. I knew we could make a system out of this, but it really rides a fine line between considered and chaos.
Yeah, this one, for me, kept me up at night thinking about it because it was just too easy to see how this could fall apart once it's handed off. Really cool, very nuanced, but you could hand it off and it could be a disaster.
And we were really excited by this direction. It felt like we could have so much fun with the shows within this. But we also had concerns it wouldn't have enough gravitas for a much more serious and heavier content like Black Market.
So the irony here is most of these frames were made by a Swiss designer, believe it or not. And Simon took the liberty to put his phone number in one of the frames just on a whim. But it was informed by that idea, again, of what you might do if you had a flyer taped up to a light pole in the city. And that frame really jumped out. People seized on it right away.
Yeah, Spike and the guys, they saw it, they loved it. It sparked ideas. This is what we really want when we're presenting. This was one frame in many, but we all saw it and we all talked about it, and it sparked a whole way of thinking about the brand that you'll see. It sort of comes up later.
Yeah, and when so much media is inundated with hashtags, call to actions, website URLs, etc., the phone number felt so counter to that. We knew we wanted something human and personal, almost analog, and we thought the number had something to that. What if we had people call in and leave voicemails, and more on that later.
Yeah, in the meeting, Spike is already pitching ideas, and Eddie's already slowing him down a little bit.
Yeah, so our third direction was even more stripped back. It was really generic. That was the thing that we were going for. And when we first met with Spike and Eddie and Matt and got the feedback and talked about it, something popped into my head. And it really sort of combined this idea of unbrand and this general punk attitude that you can just feel at Vice. And it paved the way for this direction. And I don't know if Repo Man was a movie that has a following here in America. It's sort of a cult classic. So hopefully some of you guys have seen this.
Otto, are you paying attention to me? Fuck you.
Okay, so the cursing notwithstanding, the point is really about the products here. Peaches are just called peaches. Cornflakes just say cornflakes. Beer just says beer. And that was really the starting point, was this idea of, let the products sell themselves, don't get in the way of it. And that was it. That was sort of what got us going on this direction, and this became the seed for what the brand ultimately became.
And this package felt like the best container for all of our varied content and could work beyond a TV screen. We weren't positive about it and all the mechanics, how it could work as a system, but it definitely felt like us.
So again, for us, back to the drawing board a little bit, but now we had a sort of firm territory to play within. And we started, again, filtering the references that we're pulling from this world and trying to see how it ties back and relates to Vice and what Vice is doing.
That was was a real ad. Sell your teeth online,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. So there was a lot of discussion in the studio over the nuance between default and generic and unbranded and anti-brand. But in the end, it really came down to this simple core idea that Vice is equally comfortable operating in high culture and low culture and everywhere in between, and there's sort of a shared timeless aesthetic that we can attach to that. Back in design, now we're developing the language and we're pushing. We're trying to see how far we can pull it back and how far we can push it forward before it starts to sort of lose that central theme. This is really pulled back, exposing almost an unskinned system. So you're seeing the raw parts and mechanics of a network with almost no design. We really love that idea, pulling it all the way back, but it felt like it might be limiting in some way and not have quite enough personality for the range of shows that Vice is developing. So as we're pushing, as we're playing, as we're experimenting, again, another frame, this was another Dylan Mulvaney, I believe, late night breakthrough. Just experimenting with the system, this made its way into a presentation. I think you guys loved it. For us, it opened up a new line of thinking and a new sort of language, visual language.
Yeah, and this was a big aha moment for everyone. We had the tone, but it didn't feel like we had a system. This opened up a world of grid and patterning that we could really explore and give personality to our heart's desire.
Yeah, so much of the process, the client agency process, is this collaborative, intuitive process. I mean, that's what was exciting for us, these key moments, these moments where you experiment with something, you get a reaction, you follow that, you see where it leads, and again, that's really when these things work well. It's because there's this kind of honest dialogue between the agency and the client.
So that frame, along with the other sort of mood board and reference, became the sort of cornerstone of this brand that wasn't exactly designed, but wasn't totally default or generic either. And we end up with a range of executions, still pulling the content forward, still feels alive and exciting like Vice, and now basically informs our creative platform. So this thinking, unslick, unstyled, unadorned, became the core thought that informed everything, every single touch point, including our logo exploration and the result. How do we do it, Helvetica bold. The same thought was rolled out into color, type, even layout, dead simple grids. And the way things move, in the landscape of television especially, I feel like this is very disruptive and again informed by the idea of this analog behavior, this sort of human created aesthetic.
Yeah, and we wanted to avoid a slick TV package at all costs. And these analog-like movements resonated for us. It felt imperfect, like your stoned friend was behind your TV screen typing it out.
Yeah, I think in the office the question was, can these be animated by a non-animator? If we had to, could we make the animation in Google Slides or PowerPoint or Microsoft Word or something?
Yeah, and again, that was a nuanced thing, though, where we really talked about, is it analog? Is that the thing that we're excited about? And it really wasn't. It was really about the person behind it, making it, this feeling of a person, a real person. There's a sense of touch there, which we all really gravitated towards. But we needed to figure that out so that we didn't end up just sort of rehashing analog ideas.
Yeah, and that really basic design language let us build the entire brand and let us do what we're always trying to do, which is impose a system with rules and structure, but also allow for freedom of expression. Because in the end, we're handing this over. It's not something that we're going to be able to define every single touch point. You're going to have to take it at some point and run with it. So we're creating a consistent impression without being prescriptive or without seeing the same thing. And we were able to put it right back out on the street where it came from and back out, pointing out into high culture. So the brand can also talk to viewers and fans about things that are not strictly on the network, but things that might be of interest happening out in the world at large. And still local advertising for things like interns at Vice. I believe you guys put your Wi-Fi password on the air and freaked out.
IT wasn't happy about that.
The IT department was very angry with that. Even down to the brand guidelines, which in this case took the form of a sort of printed zine because it felt authentic to the brand. And also, it's really easy to update. So as Matt and his team are evolving the brand, they can print new copies very easily in-house. And I think this led up to the handoff, which is sort of the next chapter of the talk. But that moment when you're about to deliver the brand and the tools and the examples and the sort of language, and you never know. You have your fingers crossed. It's always a little nerve-wracking. For us, though, how is this going to go once we let go and we let you guys start evolving the brand?
and any brand needs to grow. And Vice has evolved and changed many times over the years, and part of what made VICELAND so exciting was that it was a brand new thing that was taking on a life of its own. And just for context, here's Spike talking about that same idea for the brand at large.
I feel excited and anxious that, just to make sure we actually seize the opportunity as well as we can. I think we're just at the beginning. I feel like we've just built the foundation of what it can be. It's like VICELAND 1.0 right now. And I'm excited about this organism we're building and what is going to come out of this organism in the next year, 2, 3, 4 years. Knowing that this thing is finite. Everything ends. This channel one day won't exist. And this building will be occupied by something else and someone else. Before it was a factory making something, and now it's us doing this thing, and eventually it'll be something else. So right now we have this opportunity at this moment in time, and what are we going to do with it?
And part of that gives a feeling of curiosity, which is inherent in the network, and part of the curiosity is us always wanting to be a big proponent of the network being a platform for experimentation. Something as simple as the phone number we talked about earlier in Gretel's mood board became the spark for starting a hotline.
And this was an ad in the New York Times, right? A full-page ad.
It was, yeah.
Prior to launch.
Full-page ad in the New York Times.
Yep.
Talked about that.
Yeah. But anyway, so for example, prior to launch, we had the staff listening to voicemails for 13 hours. And we aired for 13 hours before the launch of the TV channel, employees listening to these voicemails. But the cool thing was it created a dialogue with the audience. It was key to show that there are humans involved and are part of making this. In the age of Twitter, which Vice has a clear handle on and understands, this is a deliberately different approach. No hashtags. The idea of the hotline was disruptive. By doing less, we were doing more.
What's up, Vice? Yo, shout out to all the documentaries. Shout out to the documentary. Shout out to the knowledge. Shout out to people trying to find something. Shout out to the people dying. Free Rasul. Free Rasul. He's pretty cool. Ooh. Free Taco. Free Taco. Get him some mild sauce on the side. Get him some mild sauce. And we'll catch you later. Catch you later.
And we still use the hotline and voicemails to this day.
I like to think this message is feedback for us.
I'd like to speak to a person, a manager of the VICELAND channel. Hello, is somebody there? I'd like to leave a message on how ugly your new VICELAND channel is. It's about such stupid people barbecuing in Canada. It's about criminal men on the show. It's the most ugly show I ever turned on in my life. I am never going to watch this channel, and so are none of my friends. That's the ugliest channel, VICELAND, that I've ever seen in my life. There's no substance to that show. It's ugly. You jackasses. I hope that channel falls apart next week. Nobody likes it. You jackasses.
That never gets old.
I gotta say, I was really upset with my mom after I found out about that.
And voicemails have been used for every international launch too, such as in Holland. We want to do the opposite of what you expect of TV, and we really ran with the system Gretel had developed. For example, we purchased a bunch of billboards that just showed the word VICELAND in different parts of the world, from Times Square, New York, to Los Angeles, to Baghdad, to Kabul, Afghanistan, Saskatchewan, that's the United States, and Colorado. We wanted to avoid jingles, avoid VO, use sounds from the office, use real sounds from the world, from the people near us. We wanted to pull back the curtain and show that there are people behind the screen. Would we use a tagline? No. it's a TV channel. That's our tagline, just plain and simple.
To this day, yeah.
Of course, this is super exciting for us. It's the ideal situation where, we hand off the work. I talked about it earlier. Sometimes the work can get diluted, in sort of a nice way of putting it, after handoff. People tend to want to put their own stamp on it and modify it. But the feeling is if we've done our job well and we've all communicated, we get excited when we see the client or other agencies pick up the work and add to it in ways that we didn't imagine but that are still true to the brand. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And if we do the core work well enough, then that's the result. So the final brand feels like this.
You see your kid laying on the ground and you don't know if you're going to watch them take their last breath, that's a hell of a feeling. And I've been through it 7 times. It's real out here. I know.
Thomas, are you going to send tomorrow?
Probably, be honest.
Are you going to send next week?
Very good chance.
Did you send last week?
A lot.
There are waves of feelings, I think, across my skull.
We have so much fun.
This is the life right here. I'm totally uncomfortable there. That's super uncomfortable right there. All right, let's go.
And also, we just wanted to give a shout out and a thanks to all the students that helped set this up. We know it was really hot yesterday, so thank you.
Thanks, you guys.